Let's talk about symbolism and how to spot it when it pops up in a book. But first, let's make sure we know exactly what symbolism is. Symbolism is when an author uses an object to represent a bigger idea. That's where we'll start. Authors can use people as symbols or actions as symbols, but we're going to start simple here with objects. When an author uses a symbol, it functions on two levels. The first level is the literal level. The symbol has to function as an actual object in the book. If it doesn't, if it only exists in a symbolic way, then it would feel out of place. So it must have a literal, real-world function within the book. But that second level is the symbolic level. And at this level, the object takes on deeper meaning. It has a bigger idea attached to it than just the basic function of the object in the real world. So let's talk about 3 ways an author might draw your attention to an object so that you think more about it. Authors want you to notice the symbol. So while they might not just jump out and tell you what it means, because that would be boring, and they'd end up just saying the same thing over and over again, they do want you to notice it. Okay, so the first way an author will draw your attention to something is if they introduce an object very dramatically. If when they introduce this object into the story, they seem to spend more time and make it a bigger deal than it would seem to warrant. If you see that, then you know the author has a purpose behind spending that much time and that much energy on a seemingly meaningless object. So that's one way. The second way is if the object itself is just strange, if it's just weird, if it just seems like you don't see that kind of thing in the real world very often, then that might be a symbol. Because obviously, if it's odd, then you're going to notice it. It's going to stick out. And they're probably trying to make it stick out for a reason. So that's the second way. The third way is if the object repeats over and over again. They keep bringing up this object more than it would seem to deserve on the surface. They keep coming back to it, and they keep adding to what they say about it. If an author repeatedly references a particular object, then it might be a symbol. So let's take a look at 3 examples from very famous books, some of which you will read in high school, and look at how authors draw your attention to symbols. This passage is from the book Lord of the Flies by William Golding, and it's an example of an author dramatically introducing an object in a way that seems bigger than the actual object would need in real life. So if you don't know, Lord of the Flies is about a group of boys who crash land on a uninhabited tropical island. And 2 boys at the very beginning are walking around. There's Ralph and there's Piggy. And Piggy says, "If this really is an island, what's that?" Ralph had stopped smiling and was pointing into the lagoon. Something creamy lay among the ferny reeds. "A stone." "No, a shell." Suddenly Piggy was abubble with decorous excitement. "Right, it's a shell. I seen one like that before, on someone's back wall. A conch, he called it. He used to blow it and then his mum would come. It's ever so valuable. Careful, you'll break it." "Shut up." Ralph spoke absently. The shell was interesting and pretty and a worthy plaything. Ralph took the shell from Piggy, and a little water ran down his arm. In color, the shell was a deep cream, touched here and there with fading pink. Between the point, worn away into a little hole, the pink lips of the mouth, lay 18 inches of shell with a slight spiral twist and covered with a delicate embossed pattern. Ralph shook the sand out of the deep tube. So what you can tell is that it's just a shell, but William Golding is going on and on about it, and it continues after this passage ends. They figure out that they can blow through the conch shell, and it makes a sound like a trumpet. And the shell becomes a symbolic object in the book. But you can tell right from the beginning that the shell is going to be important because there's so much drama in the way he introduces it, and he focuses so much on describing it. It's just a shell. So the dramatic introduction is one way you can get an inkling that an object is more than just an object. Another way an author will draw attention to an object is by making the object strange. I actually just finished reading Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, and the main character at this point is just a kid. His nickname is Milkman, and they find his aunt, who he's never really had any much interaction with, and this is the description of her. It says, they found her on the front steps sitting wide-legged in a long-sleeved, long-skirted black dress. Her hair was wrapped in black too, and from a distance all they could really see beneath her face was the bright orange she was peeling. She was all angles, he remembered later, knees mostly, and elbows. One foot pointed east, and one pointed west. As they came closer and saw the brass box dangling from her ear, Milkman knew that what with the earring, the orange, and the angled black cloth, nothing, not the wisdom of his father, nor the caution of the world, could keep him from her. So the odd object is this brass box dangling from her ear. That's just weird. Like, who has as an earring a single brass box? That's strange. And then it's brought up again here to say that that's one of the things that makes him want to get to know her, is this strange earring. So as a reader, I see that detail, and it's just so odd that I can't not notice it, and my radar is up, so I pick up on the fact that this has got to have some meaning beyond just being an earring. And it turns out it does. And the last way authors draw your attention to a symbol is by making repeated references to the symbols, especially when they don't seem to need to. So here's an example from one of my favorite all-time books, The Catcher in the Rye. And in this scene, Holden, the main character and narrator, has just been beaten up by his roommate Stradlater. And earlier in the book, Holden mentioned buying this hunting hat in New York City, and at another point early on, he talks about putting it on, and he refers to it a couple times, which kind of you notice. But then there's this. Holden's lying on the floor after getting punched. He was probably scared he'd fractured my skull or something when I hit the floor. It's too bad I didn't. You asked for it, goddammit, he said. Boy, did he look worried. I didn't even bother to get up. I just lay there on the floor for a while and kept calling him a moron son of a bitch. I was so mad I was practically bawling. Listen, go wash your face, Stradlater said. You hear me? I told him to go wash his own moron face, which was a pretty childish thing to say, but I was mad as hell. I told him to stop off on the way to the can and give Mrs. Schmidt the time. Mrs. Schmidt was the janitor's wife. She was around 65. I kept sitting there on the floor till I heard old Stradlater close the door and go down to the corridor to the can. Then I got up. I couldn't find my goddamn hunting hat anywhere. Finally I found it. It was under the bed. I put it on and turned the old peak around to the back, the way I liked it, and then I went over and took a look at my stupid face in the mirror. Okay, so he's just gotten beaten up, and his first impulse is to find his hat and put it on. That's strange. That bringing the hat up in this situation doesn't seem necessary. It seems like Holden would have something else to do after getting beaten up than find his hat and put it on the way he likes it. The fact that J.D. Salinger, the author, has Holden put his hat on in this situation draws your attention to the hat and makes you think that the hat's gotta be more important to Holden than just a hat, if it's coming into his consciousness at this particular moment when you'd think he'd have other things to do. So if you see an author bringing up the object when it doesn't seem to make all that much sense when you think about it, then they could be trying to draw your attention to it as a symbol. And of course, Holden's hat is one of the most famous symbols in American literature. So those are three things to pay attention to. But the most important thing is probably to just keep your radar on. Pay attention. Be looking for things. And remember that anything in a good book by a good author is intentional. They spend years writing and crafting these books. So if they give a seemingly meaningless object a dramatic introduction, it's not accidental. If they include an object that just seems weird and would never actually exist in the real world, then that's not accidental. And if they repeatedly reference an object more than it seems to deserve, that's not accidental either. You've just got to pay attention. And then, of course, you got to try to figure out what it means. Look at the way the author talks about it, when the author brings it up, and what kind of actions it's attached to. And you can start to get a feel for what it might represent. That's all from me. Middeman out.